All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipovich Show is Mike Ludwig. Mike is a journalist for TruthOut, which you can find at truth-out.org. You can also find him on Twitter at Ludwig_Mike. Mike, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
All right, so Mike, at TruthOut, you recently wrote, frankly, a really, really frightening piece about fracking, but this isn't just any fracking. You actually wrote about fracking in the ocean. Tell us all about it.
Sure. Now we're talking about the Santa Barbara Channel here off the coast of Santa Barbara in California, which is a seismically active area, and it's also an area that had a major oil spill in the late 60s that made headlines and kind of helped raise the consciousness of the environmental movement at the time. And there's still, oil and gas drilling, mostly oil drilling out in that, on the federal and the state waters out there. And every once in a while, in the past few years, a couple of operators have used fracking technology or hydraulic fracturing technology to enhance their oil drilling operations in the area. And they kind of did this very quietly. Nobody really knew much about it. We originally learned that one company had used kind of experimental fracking technology to enhance an old well in late 2009, early 2010. We learned about that last year, but we didn't know much about it because when we contacted the regulators, they didn't want to just hand over the permits to us, and the environmental group that originally learned about the frack job couldn't figure out much either. So I decided to investigate and file a FOIA request and try to get as much information on fracking in the ocean as possible from the federal agency that permits offshore drilling. And the result of that investigation is the story that we had.
It's an amazing story. So let's actually get to some of the details on this, because whenever a company wants to do fracking, at least on land, they actually have to do a lot of the regulation is lacking. I think both you and I would agree, and the consequences of fracking is more than what actually a lot of it shouldn't be allowed. But the way they actually went about this fracking in the ocean, they actually didn't really follow traditional fracking, the traditional fracking permit process, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that if you talk to the regulators, they would argue that this isn't traditional fracking compared to the onshore operations that have gotten so controversial. But basically, their permitting process is very limited and simple, where they basically, to approve these frack jobs, and we're specifically talking about one by a company called Vinoco in early 2010, and another one that was recently approved by a company called Decor, DCOR, that was just approved this year. And basically, they take the permits that they originally issued to these companies to drill in the area, and they just basically amend them. They modify the permits to allow the frack job, and they do it without producing a specific environmental review of the hydraulic fracturing proposal. The great way to tell me is that they look at the proposal and then they review it and then they approve a modification to the existing permit. But the environmental group that I talked to, the Center for Biological Diversity, said that when you're using experimental technologies such as modern fracking techniques, you can't just modify an existing permit and sign off on that and let these companies do that. You've actually got to review and produce a statement of the environmental impacts this technology could have, especially in an area that's not only very fragile because of the nature preserve they have in the area, but also because it's seismically active. So, and that's how they go about doing it. The company basically just says, we want to do this. We're not going to apply for a new permit. We were going to just, apply for modification of our existing permit. And without a statement produced by the regulatory agency or by, the operators who want to do this on the environmental impacts, we have to just trust the regulators that they look at these modification proposals and actually do review them for environmental impacts and not just rubber stamp them through. But, we have to basically take their word on it because they're not, producing an actual data themselves and giving it to the public.
No, I mean that's horrible and ridiculous, and the fact that they can't even be bothered to do a standard, the standard rubber stamping that happens when you do this type of hydrofracking. I mean, if you look at it's been documented time and time again, with water supplies where you actually can light the tap of water on fire because of the gas that's being released into the groundwater. You can only think about what kind of chemicals might be being released into the ocean and how that actually might be affecting the wildlife. Let's talk about that, and then we'll actually talk about the fault line, because that's also really frightening too. So talk about, do we have any idea about what type of environmental impact these chemicals that this fracking that's being used in this fracking in the ocean could actually have on the ocean itself?
Well, we really don't, because it hasn't been, a statement, an environmental impact statement, has not been produced by the government or by these operators. This doesn't happen very often, but it's happening. It could be happening more and more, but we really don't know. We actually don't know what chemicals are being used in these fracking operations because they're not, frankly, reported to the regulatory agency. I finally got the permits for these frack jobs, and nowhere in there did they discuss the contents of the hydrofracturing fluid. So no, we don't know. We don't know that, and I don't know if the regulators even know what's in it. So yeah, we don't know. I mean, I think that if you ask someone in the industry, they'll say, well, these are actually not very big fracking operations, and it's actually very rare that we do it. And it's like, well, if it's something you do very often, how can you be sure that it's safe unless we have a open and transparent review of this operation? So there's still a lot of questions that aren't answered on the potential impacts of these operations. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the other big one, which you write about, is the fact that fracking has been known to cause earthquakes on land right now. When we do fracking, in areas, it actually has been known to cause earthquakes because it shifts the plates around underneath the ground. And like you write, there actually is a major fault right near where this fracking is happening in California. And last time I checked, California has a lot of earthquakes happening. And is it necessarily the wisest idea to be doing this fracking right next to a major fault line?
Well, and now the regulators, according to the documents they gave me, they conducted a geohazard review for the most recent frack job. And you're right, basically, what fracturing is you're taking liquids and you're breaking up underground rock. It actually creates small earthquakes in of itself when these processes in operation. It actually creates very small earthquakes and breaks up the rock. But because of the liquids that are being forced underground, either by wastewater disposal or the actual process of fracking, it does, in the past has lubricated seismic parts of the ground and caused small earthquakes. So, I actually went to a bunch of geologists and asked them what they thought about this, and none of them wanted to comment, either because they were close to the government, I assume, or because there wasn't enough information made public about the potential impacts of these operations, or because it was controversial. So none of them actually wanted to go on the record because it was hard for them to really grasp what the actual danger could be. It might actually not, maybe, and in the case of the most recent approval, hydraulically fracturing 1,500 feet away from the seismic fault isn't that dangerous. But we actually don't know because the regulators just sign off on these permits without producing, any kind of potential impact statement. So it was very difficult for an independent party to review the proposal. And we still actually don't know if it's safe or not because we just, like I said, have to still take the regulators' word on it that this is safe. Their geohazard review was was complete and can assure us that there won't be any problems in an area where there have been a lot of problems already.